Hello, and welcome to the Well Bible Reading Journey podcast. We are in episode 32. We are so glad you are with us today. We have some great content for you. We're going to be in Numbers 1, 2, and 3 this week, Psalms 31, and Mark 3. Ellis is not with us here again this week. He will be here with us next week. But so for this week, I have Craig and Bobby Davis with us this week. Hey guys.
What's up, Amber?
How's it going?
It's great. Thank you for being here with us.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, when we started to prepare for this week, messaged the guys, we kind of talked about it, and all three of us were very excited about digging into Leviticus. That was the next thing, and after Exodus. And yesterday, which is Saturday, we record on Sunday. Bobby was like, "Wait, I think we're in Numbers," and all three of us were like, "Oh no!" But yeah, right. So, but you know what? We trust the Holy Spirit. We trust that God is going to do a work with the studying that we have done, and we hope to bring you some great information today. But you know what? That just means that we were that excited about Leviticus, and when we come back to it, you'll know that there's something good there for you, for sure. But let me go ahead and get set up this week with just a little bit of information about something I noticed that kind of fit Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers together, just really fast, and then I'll jump in with the guys. At the end of Exodus, when y'all just got finished reading Exodus this week, did anyone else was like, wait a second, what just happened? I was reading the very end of Exodus 40 and I was starting to celebrate. Yes, the cloud started moving off Mount Sinai and it's moving over the tent of meeting. He's about to fill, in his glory, is about to fill the tent. And I'm like celebrating. In the very next line, it says, and Moses was not able to enter the tent. I was like, wait, what? Hold on. Plot twist. When did this happen? Moses has been able to literally be in his glory cloud up on a mountain, and now his glory cloud comes down and he can't enter. I'm so confused. And of course, it gives me no information. It leaves me hanging like a good Netflix series. Lucky for us, we don't have to wait for the next season. We can just turn the page, which is what I did. And so I turned the page and I recognize in Leviticus verse 1, it says, and the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. So that's exactly right. So here you are. Moses is out. God is still speaking to him, but he's speaking to him from the tent of meeting. Moses is not in. And I was like, that's interesting. So then when I realized we're in Numbers, I go to Numbers and I realize the very first sentence, once again in Numbers, says, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Mount of Sinai in the tent of meeting. I was like, oh, he's back in, is he? And so this is interesting, y'all, because we're skipping Leviticus for now, but something amazing happens. There's this plot conflict. We don't know why. Why is Moses not able to go in? Why is he able to come in now in Numbers? What happened? We cannot wait for y'all to get into Leviticus later. It's really important. But for now, just keep that in your mind as we're reading Numbers. Something happened. Moses is back in there. This is a great story. This is a great narrative happening. Craig is going to kind of do his introduction of kind of where we are as a whole as we jump into Numbers.
Yeah, so the narrative jumps, as you said, Amber, from Exodus to Numbers. So we will follow that narrative as part of our well journey, and we'll be reading on into Numbers to continue and follow the narrative. But let us not think that by blowing past or jumping over Leviticus that's because of some antiquated notion that Leviticus itself is boring. It's not. That's the furthest from the truth. Right. Leviticus covers life in God and how the people of Israel are set apart for holiness. And to understand why Leviticus is where it is in the Bible and in its place in God's word, we have to understand the whole first 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible which Moses wrote. So that's typically called the Pentateuch in the Hebrew Bible. That's the first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Hey,
and the literary, yeah, go ahead.
Real fast. I had a little second grader. I had a second grader last year stop me. She goes, "Oh, you're doing the Pentateuch on your podcast?" For second grader, first of all. She goes, "You want to know how I remember that?" And I was like, "Tell me." She goes, "I have a pen and you took it. Pentateuch it."
That is great. I've never heard
I was like, I'm going to use that one of these days. So today was the day. Okay, sorry, Craig, go on.
Out of the mouth of babes.
I know
they're more intelligent than I am half the time. So maybe most of the time. Yeah. So anyway, this literary category of the Pentateuch reflects the traditional grouping, Jewish grouping of these 5 books together as the Torah or the law. And this isn't just any law. This isn't the law in general. This is the Jewish law that's imparted to Moses on Mount Sinai, which we just covered at the end of Exodus. So the first 5 books form a pattern that can be found among themselves that makes Leviticus itself central. And laying it out, we have what we call a chiastic structure. And if you'll remember from past podcasts, if you studied this in the past, you know a chiasm, and it's a big word, so let me lay it out. A chiasm is a literary structure that repeats similar ideas in reverse sequence. It builds upon itself, reaches a summit or a center, and then it kind of unwinds it again in reverse order. But always that golden point is nestled in the center of that structure. And for the Pentateuch, for the first 5 books of the Bible, we have Genesis, which is a sort of a prologue in creation. We have Exodus, which is nested in, and we're leaving Egypt and we're building the tabernacle. We've covered those, right? And when we get to Leviticus, or if you read it now, you'll see Leviticus is all about the tabernacle service and setting up life in God and what that looks like. And all that happens on Mount Sinai. You don't miss any narrative by reading through Leviticus or skipping it now even. It's kind of pause in while they're at Mount Sinai. So stepping back out in the structure, Numbers is kind of mirroring Exodus in the reverse order. They're dedicating the tabernacle again, but they're also they're leaving Mount Sinai and preparing to enter Canaan. And then Deuteronomy is a sort of epilogue to everything and kind of wrapping things up. So thematically, there's good reasons to believe that the Pentateuch structures Leviticus centrally, and in the sense that even Leviticus is a chiastic structure, and because the first 15 chapters cover the offerings, the various offerings of the sacrificial system, then we get to chapter 16, which is the central idea of the entire Bible, really, and the entire point of Christ, this day of atonement. We're atoned, our sins are atoned before God, and we're reconciled to Him. And then the last 9 chapters of Leviticus, you'll see when we get there, are about purified life in God. But anyway, Leviticus is the heart of the law. You have to understand it to understand what Christ did and why He came. And like Amber said, we can't wait till we get there. But in the meantime, we're blowing and going, and we're into Numbers.
Yeah, that's really great summary, because as we enter Numbers, we kind of need to know where we are as a whole, especially skipping a piece. So what is happening is, this is actually kind of beautiful, because you have in Exodus, you have the Israelites going through the wilderness and to Mount Sinai, and then immediately Numbers picks up us at Mount Sinai and then moving through the wilderness. So they're literally going to mirror each other. So it's beautiful because as we go through this, it's going to be fresh on our mind, which is going to be awesome. So Bobby, you're going to give us a little bit of a overline as Numbers as we enter in Numbers. Go for it.
Yeah, so I think the thing about Numbers is, the thing that'd be helpful from Leviticus is that, like Craig said, it does talk about it's how to preserve and sanctify the holiness of worship and cleanliness. And then Numbers looks at, okay, here's how we do that on the move, because we're getting ready to go, right? And so, yeah, I mean, you've got this story of they had done things under the Egyptians. Okay, now Leviticus kind of Mount Sinai, Exodus. Leviticus really just opens up Mount Sinai. I think, Craig, you said that, right? It kind of opens up Mount Sinai. Here's more of the stuff that happened there. And Numbers is, a way to say the theme might be to say that God has as much patience as there is sand in the desert, which is where you're going to be for a while. And we kind of pointed out that in Numbers we're going to see that the journey from, we think the journey would have taken 40 years, right? Well, the journey itself only took 11 to 14 days, about 2 weeks, depending on your pace. And they spent 40 years, and we're going to see that in Numbers. In fact, at the if you take Numbers of the chiastic structure, you see in the middle, I think about Numbers 14. It's 36 chapters long, so a little before the middle. But you see that they go spy on the land, and they say, "Oh my gosh, we can't go in, giants." And in fact, you see some exaggeration in Numbers. You're going to see they said the Nephilim are back. Well, if you remember back to Genesis 6, the Nephilim were the giants that existed before the flood. And so some people are going to see this. Oh, the Nephilim are here. Well, wait, I thought they were wiped out in the flood. Well, they were. This is an exaggeration. The people are saying, "Oh my gosh, it's I mean, like me saying Thanos is outside my door right now." Well, it's not really. So it's not. It wasn't. It's not Thanos. It's not the Nephilim. It's just some really big people that are going to wipe us out. And so, Numbers is really about as we're journeying through the desert. Um, it's kind of how is the nation going to order itself in the journeyings? How is Craig's going to? I think Craig, I love what you're going to say about the journeying, so I'm not going to touch on that or how they structure themselves. But then you get how the priests and Levites were to function and the condition of mobility. So it's setting up a tabernacle on the move, right? So I gotta have to construct it, deconstruct, move, construct, deconstruct, move. That's that looks different. And then how are they going to prepare themselves for the conquest of Canaan and their settled lives? What I like about Numbers, what it brings me to think about is, so my family goes camping, and if we're camping on a Sunday, we don't say, oh, we can't go to church, so we don't do church. Well, no, it just looks different, right?
Yeah.
We don't have, a band, we don't have
Mhm.
an orchestra. We have a time where we look at the Bible, we reflect in nature, we express gratitude, and we'll pray. And so it's different when you're on the move. Well, this
Yeah.
is what the people of Israel are doing. I think we could even apply this to if you're parenting. Parenting per child changes every 2 to 3 years. It just does. The way you approach, the way that you're going to disciple, the way that you're going to mentor, the way that you're going to parent, it changes. And I think we have to be open to and sensitive to listen to that. And so as we see in Numbers, here's how you're going to modify things. I think that's important for us to kind of reflect. Okay, how might I need to modify things? And then, but also, in Numbers, you do have some narrative sections in there. And so I think, Amber, you're going to talk about some of those narrative. Hold on. I've got to say, we got a talking donkey coming up. That's not till the end of Numbers, but he's coming.
I
So
love
no,
it.
it's not Shrek. Okay. But it's a talking
Wait to
donkey.
see it.
I
Yeah.
love
So,
it.
but Amber, yeah, you're going to say some things about the narrative section
Yeah,
or the narratives
exactly.
in Numbers.
Something that's really interesting is as we enter into Numbers, some people are number people, like my husband, and I know a few others. Someone like me, you're like, Numbers, what is this going to be about? This already lost my interest. But I learned this week that Numbers is actually, for some reason, a Greek translation of what the title originally was, because there are section of census. There are some big numbers in here that are important. So that for some reason that kind of stuck. The original Hebrew title for this section is actually called Through the Wilderness, which is the majority of the chapters are about. I mean, chapters 1 through 10, they're still in the wilderness of Sinai, and then you have chapters 13 through 19, which are they're in the remainder is this is a wilderness that they're moving out of Mount Sinai, moving towards the promised land. You're supposed to see this mirroring of Exodus. And what happens is as you remember, in Exodus, as they went through the wilderness, they had three big tests before they enter Mount Sinai. We talk about those three tests in length in our podcast. Here you have them leaving Mount Sinai, and now they're going to the wilderness, and they're going to have 7 narratives where they're going to screw up big time. They're going to grumble, they're going to fail, they're going to have outright rebellion against God. You're going to see these big things. You're going to have 7 of them. What's interesting is God, and none of them are mentioned as testing. So in these 3 over here, all 3 of them had the word testing in it. These 7 over here don't mention testing at all, but you're supposed to almost imagine that because it's supposed to be a mirroring. But I did see that God in one of the sections says, I am so fed up with these people. What am I going to do with them? I'm fed up. They have tested me in the wilderness 10 times. Oh, wait, how many times? 7 times in this section, 3 from the other, 10 total times. So God's keeping count, just for you know. And then Numbers kind of wraps up
Goodness
with
for
another.
sacrifices. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
In Numbers wraps up with another section of them wandering through the wilderness after one of their big rebellions. For sure. And then you have these sections in the middle, kind of bookend of these traveling songs. And so you get these interesting traveling songs. You get the wilderness, you get all these things, and then you get these traveling moments and these songs, and we do this over and over again. So Numbers is going to be really interesting. Craig, we are going to dig in specifically into this week's readings, Numbers 1, 2, and 3. What you got?
Yep.
Well, before we go there, Craig, do you want to talk some about those the numbers and numbers?
Yeah, that's chapter
Yeah.
1. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that I think one of the things we see with the numbers and numbers is that if you, and this is comparing the math between end of Exodus, the numbers that were in their tribes, and then the beginning of Numbers. Um, for that kind of population to build over them the time that they were in slavery from the time of slavery till the time in Numbers. If you do the math, every woman would have had to have 50 children throughout the time. That's so it could have happened. It'd be miraculous. But there's an issue with the numbers because the numbers at the end of numbers 146, that is 600 something thousand. That is just the 20 plus males serving and we know it's males because it's the ones who could serve in God's army at the time. That was just guys. So that was just 20 plus males. That 600,000 number. So we I think Craig and I are talking about some approaches. One approach I saw was the word that's used is help. So if we see, 60 help, 60,000, that word might be translated better. It could be understood as a clan or a family as well, as a technical term. So maybe it's, for Reuben, we talked about Reuben in the very first part of chapter 1, it might be 46 clans plus 500. But the problem with that one is when you get to the end, those numbers don't add up to the 603,000. So Craig, what's another one of the approaches you've seen on that?
Yeah, and to your point, it's 600,000, but it's very specific. The Bible says it's 603,550. It's not just a round number, right? So that kind of in my head, I'm thinking that's the real number, and that's just the way I'm approaching it. But one approach I've seen a couple of scholars take, and they're very confident in this. I'm not here to advocate for this versus another option because I'm not an expert. But what they said was that the 603,550 number included the mixed remnant that started traveling with the Israelites out of Egypt. So they weren't Israelites by birth or genealogically per se, perhaps, but they were others, Egyptians or Akkadians or whoever had come into the life of Israel and were observing the ritual life of Israel, the cultic life of Israel, and worshiping God.
Right. And another approach that another scholar takes is, or several scholars take, is that and like Craig said, there's people all over the place on this. So everyone knows it's an issue, so everyone's trying to explain this, right? But at the time, also in Akkadian and Egyptian literature, it was very common that you would inflate your numbers by a factor of 10 if you were celebrating or worshiping, either your culture or your God. And so we see this exaggeration. Okay, like, well, whoa, is the Bible exaggerating everything? Well, no, it's this numbers thing that happened. And so it was very common culturally if you were going to state a number that in these times, and again, you have to remember that the intended audience was Israel, not us. We kind of have to read some of that audience into this passage. And so, this factor of 10, it might be it might be new to us, but it was definitely not new to them. It might be like saying, this is the best day of my life. And then, thousands of years from now said, hey, Bobby Davis said that was the best day of his life. So he said it, that had to have been, well, no, okay, sorry, I was exaggerating. So when we get to heaven, sit down with Moses, say, okay, sorry, busted. Yes, it was, I multiplied it. And that's one approach. But even with that 10x inflation, that means every woman having 5 children during the time of slavery. That the fact that Israel prospered should blow your mind and say that was a miracle. Just the way that not just getting out of Egypt, the fact that they flourished in Egypt under slavery, because that's not great conditions, right?
Right.
And so I think that still this number is something to celebrate as they're going into the wilderness. Hey, let's take a time, let's celebrate what God's done for us. That's what's happening here. But Craig, you're going to get some more into the number, kind of in what's going on in chapter 1.
Yeah, I love.
Or Amber, I think, yeah.
No, you're good. I love y'all's back and forth. I think it's not really our job on here to kind of decide which direction to go, where to go. But if you're interested in that, there's actually plenty of literature that will help you go different directions. I have a couple written down. Maybe I'll have Ellis add it to the link of different scholars have gone different directions. At the end of the day, the numbers of numbers can be a rabbit hole. It just can. But I think what we're supposed to understand, I think the purpose of what we can know right now without making a decision to move forward is that we're supposed to see that God's blessing of being fruitful and multiply has happened. Remember in Genesis, when someone was fruitful and multiplied, that was God's blessing upon them. So in the midst of slavery, in the midst of oppression, they were fruitful and they multiplied. Basically, you're supposed to see that God blessed them greatly. That's the number that you're supposed to really pay attention to. And where you fall in the fence of the rabbit hole, you can dig that on your own time.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Craig, keep going into Numbers chapter 1 that you had.
Yep. And we talk about numbers, and to y'all's point, the point of the numbers is that Israel is a multitude, right? They've followed God's command to spread and be fruitful, multiplying. God is blessing that. So we've gotten to the point that they are at Sinai and they need to be counted, right? So in Numbers 1, I think, Bobby, you mentioned the point is to bring order to their life as a community so they can travel in an orderly fashion. God is a God of order, right? And what God ordains, he's going to do in an orderly fashion. So the census at this point is needed to understand the exact genealogical listing for purposes of land inheritance. That each clan has to understand how big they are so they understand how much land they're going to get when they get to the promised land. Also, there's a point of needing to muster and organize for war, and they need to understand how many males over the age of 20 are within the clan, so they know who needs to organize in what fashion, right? So war is another activity that requires, I'll say, hyper organization, and you have to know beforehand what the plans are so you're not planning when the danger is before you. So God is preparing them for that. Also in verse 16, they choose 12 that's chosen from the congregation to lead the different tribes. And God, they're called by God to be heads of their divisions. So these are considered the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. They're heads of thousands of Israels, or we might say divisions. And so they present all males by head, literally the skull, over 20, like I said, the age of 20, minus the Levites. And I'll get to that in a second. So put a thumbtack there and we'll come back to Levites. But that is 603,550 is just a staggering number, to Bobby's point. Just to give you context, that would take scholars estimate between 3 to 12 square miles to fill. They're not exactly sure, but depending on how the arrangement around the tabernacle would be spaced out in Numbers 2, it really it's just staggering the amount of space that would take.
I looked up in 2020, just Dallas alone, no other, not Metroplex, just Dallas alone had 1.3 million. So there's more Israelites right now than there would be just Dallas. If people need a little bit of an idea.
Yeah, just keep in mind that 600,000 is just men, right?
Right.
And
yeah,
you got to take their wives, their kids, and their animal provisions, their donkeys, cattle, chickens, dogs, cats, whatever they have. This is a huge number of people, in the millions for sure.
Kind of brings up the importance of the manna.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. And like I said, we put a thumbtack on the Levites. We get to them in chapter 3 when they're counted. And why aren't they counted in chapter 1 with the rest of them? And why are they preserved for chapter 3? It's not because they're not important, but they are literally set apart for service to the Lord. And they are used to redeem the firstborn of Israel that God claimed on the way out of the Exodus. So we see that most of them, there's almost enough Levites to cover the firstborn of the Israelites, but they have to pay a little bit of money back to Aaron to cover I think it was 200. I didn't write that in my notes, but I think it was 200 or so. Y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of bringing all these numbers together and summarizing. What's the point, right? Why do we go through all these numbers other than it's just fun for these clans to understand how many they have, and for later posterity to understand their genealogical heritage? We get into that. Who am I descended from, right? It's kind of fun to do. But beyond that, what's the point? There is a theological point. So bear with me for a second. Around the tabernacle, the clans, the tribes are camped, right? And God is very particular in how he tells Moses to place them. On the east side of the tabernacle, the numbers for the clans add up to 886,400. On the west side, it's 108,100. And then the north and the south side, it's almost the same, 157,600 on the north side and 151,450 on the south side. So what's the point? When you kind of graph all that out and space it, it forms a cross. It blows your mind when we think that even at this early stage, God is setting up the pointers to Christ and salvation in him. And so follow me again for a second. We get on the east side is the length of the base of the cross. And we got Judah, whose name translates praise. They're leading the pack. We are leading, marching forward out of praise for God. And they're forming the base, the structure of the cross, holding it up. The north and south sides are about the same length, or the arms of the cross. And then on the east side, the west side, is a little bit shorter than the east side, the base. So it's the top of the cross. The tribes that form the west side are the top of the cross, and they're the three tribes from Rachel. And so Leah and Rachel in Genesis formed symbolism for themselves. Leah was the law and Rachel was grace. And so on the grace is at the head of the cross, and grace coming into life of Christ and life in Christ. We can't enter God's presence any other way. So again, the symbolism is just incredible to me, and I was blown away by it.
Love that.
I want to ask Amber to talk. I think you're going to talk about this, Amber, but I want to bring this up. Make sure we don't miss it, because if you blink, you do miss it. In 132, chapter 1, verse 32, you get this little phrase from the sons of Joseph, and then it doesn't list anything, and then it almost skips Joseph. Like, what? Why are we skipping Joseph? He was like a big deal in Genesis, right? I mean, he was the guy.
Exactly.
So, Amber, you're going to mention like what happened there.
Yeah, exactly. I thank you for leading that in for me. But I was like, okay, wait a second. I thought there was 12 tribes.
Yeah.
Now I see that there's a Levites tribe. So there's 13 tribes. How did I miss that? And so I was kind of reminded back in Genesis. So you have, these are supposed to be Jacob's sons, and Jacob's 12 sons. And there's several things that I have in mind. But first of all, they're the 12 sons, but Joseph, the beloved one, ended up having 2 sons. And at the very end, very, very, very end of Genesis, you see Jacob almost adopt the two sons, and they take the place of Joseph. So the reason why Joseph is not listed here is because it's his 2 sons. So it's his sons and his grandsons. So that's 13 tribes. We have 13 tribes, but one is set apart for the work of the Lord. And so that's sort of where you get, but for some reason, I just missed that. I'm like, oh yeah, it's 12 plus the Levites. I just think I missed that. Also, to further on with your imaging that you just gave us, Craig, I think we will definitely find an image and post it with our group, so you can kind of see this image of the cross, how it's set up. I will definitely see if we can get one of those posted with our link today. But interestingly is that there's all this concept of being the firstborn. It's really important to be the firstborn. And if you remember Jacob's sons, Reuben was the oldest, so technically he's the oldest, but he did something to his Jacob's wife, and I think it made him where Jacob was like, nope, you've lost your thing. And then Simon and Levi were the next 2, and then they did something. Remember, they killed a whole city and plundered them because of what they did to their sister, and then they lost their opportunity. And then lastly, so the next one technically is Judah, and that is why Judah is right in front, and they're the ones that lead. Judah is the one that leads because they're representative of the firstborn now.
They're one of the biggest tribes too.
That's right, they're the biggest tribe. So that's just another interesting thing to put together.
And the symbol of Judah is a lion, which is also another symbol that's prescribed to Christ.
Very cool.
He's a lion of Judah, right?
Yeah.
Lion of the lion, I guess.
Yeah.
What else do you guys have? Anything else in this section? There's so much that I want to say, but we're running out of time, so let's skip to Mark. Yeah, let's skip to Mark. I have like so much I want to say, but I'm going to refrain.
Did you really quickly want to say something about the Levites in 3? Why they were separate?
I hope you guys read into this and really dig into the Levites and what it means for them to take on the firstborns of all the tribes. Just read into that. This is really significant, but we're going to run out of time, so let's jump into Mark. Jump into Mark
real quick, Amber. Since we're on Psalm 31, I want to mention real quick that it seems like I'm picking one thing out of Psalms every week, even though we're not supposed to focus on it here. But look at the words in verse 5 of Psalm 31. Into your hands I commit my spirit. Where have we heard that before?
Yeah.
We just finished Matthew. We saw the cross, and that's one of Jesus's words, right? So,
Right.
so Jesus, we've seen another place where Jesus claims a psalm through his words, right? His famous last words on the cross. This is another one. When he dies, he's claiming this whole psalm, and the point of this psalm is God is his refuge. God is my refuge.
It's
So don't
good.
miss that.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I can always count on Craig to have a psalm reference for us every week.
That's
um,
what it
that's right.
is.
So as we move into Mark, we are here again. We're in Mark 3, and we've already mentioned it's going to be like boom, 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 story, story, story. Each story is really short, but it is packed, jam-packed of information. So, Craig, Bobby, either one of you jump in. What do you think about Mark 3? What stood out to you this week?
Uh, I'll, I'll start with a point about the Sabbath in verses 1 through 6.
Okay.
And it's within the story of him healing the man with the withered hand. But we're still on the Sabbath here, right? We ended up with Mark 2 talking about the Sabbath, and we're still on it. This is a point Jesus is trying to make. And what is that? What was the Sabbath was meant to be a reflection on who Israel was in God, and a celebration of rest and life in God, a reflection on the creation and how God saw it was good and he rested from his work. And it was meant to be a picture for the rest of the world of life in God and be a light to the world. But Israel was taking that light and hoarding it for themselves. And they're like, well, we have the light. This is our light, and the rest of you can just live in darkness. So they were kind of using it as a point of national distinction or national pride. And this is what Jesus is militating against. He wants to reclaim it for its purpose and restore it to the meaning that it's supposed to be for the world. And we should not judge so quickly, because we tend to do the same thing. Maybe definitely not in the same way, right? Because times change and we have different contexts. But we see a huge intermingling of religion and nationalism going on, not just in America, but across the world. And we really need to be careful, because when we get to the sense of, in their day, the Sabbath was being used to show it's not enough to be just a loyal Jew. You have to be even more loyal in this way that the leaders or the scribes or the Pharisees dictate. In our way, we're seeing this in our view too, with some either cultural leaders or political thought leaders, or even religious thought leaders. Well, you can't be just a loyal X, fill in the blank. You have to be more than loyal in this way that I'm telling you how to be. So just watch out for that in life. It's never going to lead you anywhere good.
Yeah, that's good. A reminder of what every time we see him, there's going to be this concept of him fighting them on the Sabbath on a regular basis. This won't be the last time we see this. He's like, you guys are just not getting it. And so, yeah, thank you for that reminder. In the same section, I thought it was interesting. Something stood out to me when Jesus is talking to them and he's getting a little frustrated. It even says that he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardened hearts, hardness of their hearts. Wow, I thought to myself, I was like, man, I think sometimes we forget that it's okay to have a beautiful balance of anger and grief. Anger creates action. Grief creates compassion, and we need both. When we see people we love struggling or fighting sinful nature, when we see our wacky world these days, I feel like most of the time we either one extreme or the other. We're very angry, which can cause us lashing out, which is not helpful. Or we see lots of grief, we just kind of give up and you're like despair, and that's not helpful either. Jesus is showing us that you need a balance of both. When you have both compassion and action, you get righteous reaction. And
Yeah.
it reminds me of God's character. Jesus just takes on God's character. I noticed it with Noah. In the Noah story, right before the flood happens, it says that he's angry. He sees the wickedness of everyone, and they're terrible. The hearts are forever wicked, is basically what it's saying. And then it says, and then he said he grieved that he had to create them, that he's going to have to destroy them. And so God shows the same character, and you see Jesus holding it up here. And I think we need to try to do that as well in our world. So I think that stood out to me this week.
And we're kind of summarizing that. I think there's something there. I think we can say that empathy without passion is unproductive. but passion without empathy is very dangerous.
Yes. Yeah.
I think with one without the other is it's non-productive or dangerous.
Yeah.
So one thing I took, and I think this is also kind of, Pastor Ellis looked at Mark 3 this morning in the sermon. And so, if you want to dig more into what that was, I think you weren't there. It'll be August 14th is when it comes out, right? But the part where, Jesus or Jesus' brothers and Mary are outside, and uh, Jesus is starting to attract a lot of attention. And now Mary knew that Jesus was the Son of God. You could go back to Matthew chapter 2, or where's the Magnificat? No, Luke 2, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Magnificat. It's a Mary's song. You can go back to Mary's song and say, okay, she knew Jesus was the Son of God, but it's still her little boy, right? And so she's still on this like, yes, God, I want you to I want you to do this, but let me help. And there's this time where she comes and says, they're trying to say, oh, he's just crazy. He's just speaking some crazy things. Don't listen to him. We'll take him home. And so you get some of that there, and I think it's more of a protective thing than it is a disbelief thing. There's I guess there's cases for both, but just from what we know about Mary, I think it was much more of a protective thing than it was a lack of faith or lack of believing who Jesus was. And then you see Jesus say, he uses this as an opportunity and says, hey, who was my mother, my brother, my sisters? And it says, hey, it's whoever does the will of God. And then he says, but then he creates that as a community. He creates a family, the mothers, the brothers, the sisters. It's a community. And I'll say this, one thing I thought about that is if you ever are trying to do the will of God and it's leading you towards disengagement or disconnecting, you might want to check what you're doing. Because I think to a fault, our culture makes ways to disconnect by means of screens, apps, as a temporary anesthetic, to give us some satisfaction, to relieve suffering. But the real relief from suffering, the real finding of satisfaction is in community, and that's harder, but I think it's right. So that's one thing that kind of stood out to me in Mark 3.
That's good. Thank you for bringing that out. You're exactly right. And this section of the family is kind of separated in two parts. I don't know if you all noticed this. It's like he starts to talk about the family. He interrupts himself with this information about the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, which we won't have time to get to in today. Great topic. And then we finishes with the family. And this is a famous, people call it a Markan sandwich, where Mark will start something, he interrupts himself with something else, and he finishes it. And he's like, Mark is doing his own little commentary. They're all supposed to fit together. So when you see, he's going to have 9 of these throughout the Mark's gospel. So I'll bring them up again, but pay attention to these Markan sandwiches. And there you have the bread and you have the meat. And so they all are part of together. So that's a Markan sandwich. When you read this week, pay attention to that. We're running out of time, but I just want to finish by saying, as you read this week, my prayer for you is that you will see God's character and Jesus's character as one, and just pay attention to their character in the midst of all these stories. Don't get caught up in the narrative. Pay attention to their heart and see what it brings out differently for you. Look for that Markan sandwich. I hope you guys have an incredible week getting into God's word. You will be blessed by it. We'll see you next week.